Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I hope you are bundled up wherever you are.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're anywhere near Texas, or really the Midwest right now, you know exactly what kind of day it is. It's Tuesday, January 27th, 2026.
And we are right in the middle of Winter Storm Fern.
It is. It is something else.
It is brutal out there. I was just looking at the reports this morning. Wind chills hitting, 4 degrees in Dallas?
4 degrees. And snow all over North Texas.
Yeah, it's the kind of cold that just makes you want to crank the heat and not move until March.
Exactly. And, usually when we talk about weather like this, it's about, flight cancellations, maybe schools being closed.
Right. Usual stuff.
But that's the thing, and this is why we're doing this deep dive today. The real story here isn't just the snow.
No.
It's something that happened behind the scenes this past Sunday that honestly feels like a turning point.
It really did. It feels like one of those moments where a problem we've all been talking about in theory.
A future problem.
Exactly. A distant future problem just suddenly became very, very real.
We're talking about an unprecedented move by the federal government. The U.S. Department of Energy issued an emergency order, and it basically changes the entire rule book for how we use electricity.
It does. They've authorized ERCOT, that's the grid operator in Texas, to force massive energy consumers offline.
Not just offline, but to switch to their own backup generators.
Right. And when we say massive energy consumers, we are talking about, like, a car factory.
No. We are talking specifically about data centers.
The enormous server farms that are powering artificial intelligence.
So our mission today is to really unpack this. We need to understand this collision between the extreme weather, our, let's face it, aging infrastructure.
And this just explosive new demand from AI.
Because for years, you've heard the experts predict an energy crisis for the 2030s.
And what this week just showed us is that the 2030s arrived a little early.
The future is here. And it is very hungry for power.
Very.
So let's get into the specifics of this order.
Right.
It came from Energy Secretary Chris Wright on Sunday.
Right.
And reading through the document, it just feels weighty. What exactly does it let ERCOT do?
So to really get the gravity here, you have to look at the legal tool they used. Secretary Wright invoked Section 202C of the Federal Power Act.
Okay.
And that is not something they do lightly. Section 22C is. It's basically the government's break glass in case of emergency hammer.
That sounds pretty serious.
It is. It gives the Department of Energy the authority to order temporary changes to the whole electric system if they think it's in the public interest during an emergency.
So it's a federal override.
It's the Fed stepping in and saying, look, the normal rules are out the window right now. We have to keep the lights on.
And in this case, the order is aimed squarely at ERCOT in Texas.
Precisely. It says that if the Texas grid hits emergency level 3...
Which is bad.
Which is very bad. Or if ERCOT has just run out of all its other options, they can then direct these specific, large customers to get off the grid.
And get off the grid means, what, just turn everything off?
Not quite. It means they have to switch to their on-site backup generation. Most of these huge data centers, they have these massive banks of generators, usually diesel, just sitting there.
For their own reliability, right, if the grid goes down.
Exactly. That's their insurance policy. But now the government is saying, you need to turn those on now, not to save your own data, but to save the grid for everyone else.
Wow. That is a huge shift in logic.
The script is completely flipped.
So the backup generators are no longer an insurance policy for the company. They're now a resource for the entire state.
That's it. And we should be clear, ERCOT CEO, Pablo Vegas, he specifically asked for this. He wrote to the DOE.
He wanted this power.
He did. He said the gap between supply and demand was getting dangerously narrow. He explicitly warned about rotating outages.
What we all call rolling blackouts.
Right. And he wanted this authority in his back pocket to prevent another catastrophe like we've seen in past winters.
So he didn't want to be the guy cutting power to someone's house while a server farm is still, training a chatbot.
That is the absolute crux of it.
But there is a trade-off. You mentioned that those generators are diesel. We're not talking about clean energy here.
No, not at all. That's the catch. These are industrial-scale diesel generators. They're loud. They pump out a lot of exhaust.
And normally there are strict environmental rules about that.
Very strict. You can't just run them whenever you want. The EPA has a lot to say about running a diesel plant around the clock.
But this order just waives that.
It includes a waiver, yes. It allows them to bypass certain federal, state, and local environmental regs.
The logic being that keeping people's heat on is more important than temporary air pollution.
It's a triage situation. That's exactly right.
Is it a total free-for-all, though?
No, there are some guardrails.
Mhm.
The order says they have to minimize the environmental impact to the maximum extent practicable. And ERCOT has to report back to the DOE within a day of using the power. They have to log how much fuel was burned, why they did it, all of it.
So it is a desperate measure. It's prioritizing immediate human safety over everything else just for a short window.
A very stark calculation, yeah.
Now, you said this targets data centers,
Uh,
but there have to be exceptions, right? I can't imagine they're telling, say, a hospital to fire up its backup generator.
no, and that's a really crucial part of the order. It creates a very clear hierarchy of who matters most.
Priority list.
A very clear one. There's a list of exclusions. Defense facilities, homeland security, hospitals, 911 call
Not
centers,
some critical stuff.
water treatment plants, natural gas pipelines, they're all exempt. They stay on the main grid no matter what.
So if you're saving lives or keeping the water running, you're safe.
You're tier 1.
But if you're training a large language model to, I don't know, write a sonnet.
You might be running on diesel for a little while. That's the new reality. Critical infrastructure first, homes second, and this high-tech economic activity is now interruptible.
So let's pivot to the why now question. I mean, we've had cold snaps before. Texas has definitely had winter storms. Why is the grid so stressed this time?
It's a perfect storm, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
You've got 3 big factors all hitting at once. Factor 1 is, of course, the weather. Winter Storm Fern is a monster. It is driving record heating demand.
Right. Everyone's got their heaters cranked up to fight that 4-degree wind chill. That's a huge electrical load.
A massive load. Then you have factor 2, supply issues. There are reports of some power plants being out and restricted fuel supplies in the eastern U.S.
So the generation side is already a little shaky.
It's limping a bit. We don't have a big surplus just sitting around.
And then there's factor 3, the big one, the new variable that just wasn't there at this scale 5 or 10 years ago.
The AI data centers.
The AI power crunch. We have to really get our heads around the scale of these places.
We do.
I mean, these aren't just office buildings with some servers in the basement.
Not at all. I think people picture this small, sterile room. A modern hyperscale data center uses as much energy as a small city.
A small city. That is just a wild comparison.
And unlike a city which powers down at night, these data centers run flat out 24/7.
So one building could be using the same power as, what, 50,000 homes?
Easily, sometimes more. And they are everywhere now. The sources we looked at, they all talk about how analysts saw this coming,
Yeah.
but they thought we had more time.
They were looking at charts for the late 2020s, maybe the 2030s.
Right. They were saying, okay, by 2030, this is going to be a real bottleneck. But one of the sources put it perfectly. The future arrived early.
AI was the accelerant.
It was the accelerant. I mean, it didn't create the crisis on its own. We've had aging infrastructure for decades. The permitting process for new power lines is painfully slow.
Those problems were already there.
They were sitting there waiting, but then you drop this massive, concentrated, nonstop demand from AI on top of it, and poof, there goes your margin for error.
So the AI revolution is just moving faster than the physical world can keep up.
That's the key takeaway. You can write and deploy code in an instant. You can build a server wrap in a week.
But you can't build a power plant in a week.
You can't. Building a new power plant or stringing high voltage lines takes years. Just the permitting takes years. That mismatch in speed is what's catching up to us.
And it feels like this is forcing a fundamental shift in how we even think about electricity.
It is.
Which brings up this really interesting concept from one of the articles, the idea of electricity moving from a commodity to a managed resource.
This is a profound change. For, the last 100 years, electricity in America was basically a commodity.
If you could pay your bill, you got it.
You got it. If you wanted to build a factory, you paid the rates, you turned on the machines. The grid was built to just accommodate growth. The assumption was always that supply would meet demand.
But this DOE order is the government stepping in and saying, actually, no, we have to decide who gets the electrons.
Exactly. We're entering an era of scarcity, and we're seeing this new hierarchy being written in real time. Priority 1, homes, hospitals, critical infrastructure, non-negotiable.
Of course, you can't let people freeze.
Right. But then priority 2 is this huge slice of economic activity, like AI, that is now conditional.
Conditional on the grid being stable.
And priority 3 is these big, flexible users who are now being told, you have to absorb the cuts or provide your own power.
It's fascinating because the Trump administration's statement about this was so aggressive. They said the goal was to unleash all available power generation.
It's battle language.
It is. It frames this as a fight for resources.
And that's what it is. The administration is essentially saying that in a crisis, all tools are on the table, including dirty diesel generators, because keeping the grid up is the #1 concern. Environmental rules won't stand in the way of keeping the lights on.
I just want to do a quick status check for everyone listening, just so we're clear on where things are right now. The order is in effect through today,
Yeah.
Tuesday. Did the grid actually fare?
So as of our sources, which were reporting Sunday and Monday, the grid was actually holding up.
Okay.
ERCOT was reporting normal conditions with enough reserves. So the system hasn't collapsed.
But there were people without power.
Yes, about 83,000 to 90,000 Texans. But ERCOT was saying those were likely local outages. You know, an ice-covered power line goes down in a neighborhood, a transformer blows.
Not a systemic statewide failure like we saw in 2021.
Exactly. This order was a preventative measure. It was a preemptive strike.
They saw the writing on the wall.
They looked at the forecast, they looked at the demand, and they said, we cannot risk this. They wanted to be able to pull that lever before things spiraled out of control.
Which brings us to the big so what of all this. Because even if the grid stays up, the fact that we even had to do this feels huge. What are the long-term implications?
I think the biggest one is about the limits of the AI revolution itself. There was a line in one of the sources that it really stuck with me.
What was it?
Compute is no longer the limit. Electrons are.
Wow. That's a bumper sticker for the next decade.
It really is. We've spent years obsessed with chip shortages and getting enough GPUs from NVIDIA, but now we're realizing the true strategic bottleneck is energy.
You can have all the chips in the world.
But if you can't plug them in, they're just expensive paperweights.
So what does this mean for the big tech companies? Their whole business model is based on endless growth.
It means their operations have to change, fundamentally. These mandatory curtailments, being told to power down or switch off the grid, they might become routine.
Not just for a freak winter storm.
No, it could happen during a summer heat wave or on a calm day when the wind turbines aren't spinning.
And you can't run a global business like that. You can't just turn off the brain of your company because the wind stopped blowing in West Texas.
You can't. So that leads to the second implication. Future data centers are going to look very different.
How so?
They'll probably need massive on-site generation just to get a permit to build. And I'm not just talking about backup diesel anymore.
You mean their own power plants?
Their own natural gas plants, huge battery arrays, maybe even small modular nuclear reactors. They have to become, to some degree, grid independent.
They have to bring their own power to the party.
Because the public grid can't guarantee it for them anymore.
But what about the towns and cities? It used to be a huge win to get a Google data center built in your county.
That's the third implication, regional planning. We might start seeing communities actually pushing back, limiting new AI facilities.
Because they suck up all the power.
Because if a new data center is going to drive up electricity prices for everyone else and threaten the grid's reliability, a town might just say, no thanks.
It's a sobering reality check, isn't it? We get so caught up in the idea of the cloud, we forget it's a physical thing made of metal that eats an incredible amount of electricity.
And that physical thing is now in direct competition with your home's heater. That's the conflict Winter Storm Fern laid bare.
So to recap for you listening, maybe as you're driving to work, this storm in Texas pulled back the curtain. The government had to use emergency powers to choose heating homes over powering AI.
Right. It proves this whole energy gap isn't some theoretical problem on a spreadsheet for 2030 anymore.
It's an operational problem right now in 2026.
It is.
And here's the thought I really want to leave everyone with. We are doing this today in 2026 for one winter storm, but AI demand is projected to double, maybe triple, in just the next few years.
That's the really scary part. If we're already at the breaking point now, what happens then?
We're entering an era where we as a society literally have to choose where the electrons go. Do they keep us warm? Do they run our factories?
Or do they go to training the next generation of artificial intelligence?
And that choice is going to define our economy for the next decade. It's not just about tech anymore. It's about physics.
It always comes back to physics. You can't cheat the laws of thermodynamics.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap it up. Stay warm out there, everyone. Stay safe.
And stay curious.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.